In this second episode I would like to share some memories of the period 81-88, which were my formative years, I might say, or which will maybe make clear where my thoughts come from, or my way of being, or my approach of things. When I was 6, my father taught me how to use a Super 8 camera. The first image I shot was his head, his face I mean, a bit blurred, out of focus, but recognizable still. When I was 8, I received a photo camera, and so I've always been filming and shooting photographs, mainly portraits of my mom. She was my primary model, and or she was the only one maybe willing to be there or to allow herself to be photographed, or otherwise maybe it was my way of drawing her attention and making her happy, because whenever I wanted to make a portrait, she became very happy. I think she needed this attention, or as a child I thought she needed attention. I don't know, there was some chemistry between her and me. I filmed family members and family gatherings, but also a fictional movie when I was 14, I think, with all my friends. And when I was writing my PhD in 2012, I found one of these Super 8 films, a fictional story, and I asked somebody to digitize it for me, and then I saw a shot of my friends playing in the snow, shot from an impossible vantage point. So weirdly enough, I could not recognize the spot where, when I was 14, all my friends were playing in the snow. Not because of the snow, I just did not recognize anything. And I also did not understand where I would have been, because I'm shooting the scene from very high up, and I didn't know of any place in my neighborhood, former neighborhood, childhood neighborhood, where I could do this, until I remembered the physical experience of being high up in a tree. And then I also understood that my friends were playing in the snow while I was filming them high up in some tree, just confirming the distance between them and me. I think I've always been a kind of outsider. I've never been the person playing in the snow, and right from the start I was the one observing my mom, observing my friends, staging my friends also. But I got, early on already, I became acquainted with not only shooting Super 8 movies, but editing them, etc. And then I also loved theater, and when I was 16 I joined some, I don't know how you call it, it's not a club, but group, I don't know, a theater group. I did some amateur theater, and then when I was 18 I started studying philosophy and literature, and I started acting in videos made by a cousin of mine who also had acted in my Super 8 movies years earlier. And I also became a professional actor. Some friends who had seen me play invited me to be in a professional play when I was about 19, I think. And so I got some experience there as well. Later I directed some plays, I wrote some plays. I loved theater a lot. and then when I was about 20, 21, as an actor participating in the nocturnal life of actors and dancers who get a lot of adrenaline when they play and then cannot go to sleep. So there is some nocturnal life related to the nature of their job. And participating in this nocturnal life, I met painters. Whether they also produced adrenaline at night because of their painting, I don't know, but they were there as well. And some of them wanted to meet me and wanted me to write about their work. So I think the first text, no, that's not the first text. At some point, some painter from Brussels, 2 years younger than me, Damien de Lepeleire, asked me if he could paint my portrait, and I met him, I met his studio, I visited his studio, and then he asked me if I could write something about his work, and then having heard that I could write or that I wrote poems, he had witnessed me reciting a poem I had written on the spot during a birthday party. And he told me he was impressed by this. I remember during this same party, 6 or 8 painters and actors gathered in a circle and showed their dick to each other. I was happily not part of the circle, I was outside of it, but I saw them do this. Why I tell you this, I don't know, but it was the same party where I recited this poem that I had written during the party. So while other people are showing their dicks to each other, I'm silly enough to write a poem. I don't know why, or something that I think is a poem. Anyway, I recited it, he loved it, he wanted to do my portrait. And this is how I got introduced to the work and the lives of young painters when I was 20 years old, 21, 22 maybe, later. And my first texts were an interview with the singer David Linx on a project he did with James Baldwin. And then also a text for my friend Damien de Lepeleire, a text for an actor friend, Dirk Opstalen, who also made drawings, and then soon also some short texts for a catalogue published in Charleroi called Zappé, and there I wrote text about the photographer Charles Van Oryk and also the painter Michel Frère. Okay, that's it, that's how it started. And having had this training as a philosopher or a philosophy student, and having encountered literature, I realized soon I could not really write about paintings or painters because I didn't really know what it was about. I couldn't really see the paintings. And so as a philosopher, I started wondering what art might be. I think I read 2 or 3 articles on art in some magazines that Damien de Lepeleire gave me, and I thought it was not interesting to read these texts. I also did not think I learned anything from these texts. And I had finished my studies with the study of Borges, Kafka, Nietzsche, and the starting point had been my attempt to read Kafka as a writer who wrote what he wrote about. So I read his oeuvre as a self-explaining text, a text that did not need interpretation. And for example, in The Castle, the protagonist tries to get close to Clam, who is supposed to have some power within the hierarchy. He can never reach Clam, but he receives a letter, and the letter indicates, let me summarize it quickly, that you can never trust written words, that the whatever you might get as information about a certain circumstance regarding the castle or the village or any legal matter, it would always be a matter of discussion. So Kafka included in his writings texts that told you that at the same time you could only trust the writing and not trust it. So having done this, I set out looking at art, knowing that I could not see what it was about, not wanting to interpret it or add any story, image or ideas or feelings of mine to it without clearly saying so, and trying to help other people that were as blind as me to look at the works and feel, see or grasp what they maybe were about, but then not in the sense of a hidden meaning, but more in the sense of how did this specific artist added a personal approach to all works of art that exist already. So in what way do Kafka's writings differ from all other writings before him? And this is, of course, as Milan Kundera wrote, in Kafka's case, it's the fact, for example, that his German, he was Czech, that his German was very simple or seemed to be very simple, and that Kafka was not afraid of repeating words. And Kundera gives the example of a passage in which the protagonist of the castle makes love to Frida, and there is a paragraph in which Kafka uses the word gehen 5 times. Gehen means to go, to move, to step, to walk forwards. And Kundera had noticed in 5 different translations, French translations of Kafka, that the translators always replaced the word gehen by other words like avancer, s'avancer, déambuler, progresser. They were incapable of also repeating the word marcher 5 times. Whereas it's quite obvious that if you try to evoke the repetitive nature of a sexual act, it might be useful and functional to repeat the same word 5 times. Especially because it almost becomes a kind of walk through the desert. A monotonous but at the same time dreamlike walk. So the specificity of Kafka's writings consists of this apparent simplicity. And so I started out looking at paintings of my friends and getting acquainted with these paintings, their way of working, and then slowly learning more about other paintings, other artists, and then also deciding not to write about works that I had not seen in reality, that I had not really studied, and then by study I mean having been present when they were made, having helped to make them, having exhibited them, having photographed them, filmed them, written about them, and then submit the text to the artist to get feedback, to understand whether I was close to what they, she or he had intended to do or thought they had been doing. And slowly I started discerning between three vantage points, three things one can write about when one writes about contemporary art. And I think these three things are the texture of the work. How is it made, which materials and techniques are used, and how are they used, and in which deviant way are they used? Then secondly, the intentions of the artist, if we know them. And then thirdly, the projections of the onlooker, in my case, the art critic or the art historian. I discovered that in many texts these three things are confused all the time, so you never know whether something is really what it is, something was fantasized by the writer, or something belonged to the original intentions of the artist. Because it's clear that the original intentions of the artist do not always correspond to what they, she or he made, actually made, or what this thing that has been made, this artifact, might mean to other people. Also later I added the idea that you do not have to find out what the meaning of a work of art is, because I don't think works of art really have a meaning that has to be discovered or that is supposed to have been at the origin of the work of art and then has been translated into a form, which is what intellectuals believe. But we can realize that the work of art can mean something to us, and this is not the same thing. I compare it to a tree, for example. A tree can mean something to you without having a meaning. So you can distinguish between what something is, how it is specific and different from everything else that was made before. And I think that's how a work of art comes into being. It comes into being by being different from everything else. It's a difference that makes it, turns it into a work of art, not the correspondence, as art historians seem to believe. It's not because something looks like art that it's art. Generally, then it isn't. It becomes art by not being like all other artworks, but moving us, meaning something to us anyway. I think a key concept that I only coined recently that you can use also to look at it is the concept of the improvising craftsman. When he said that painting was a mental thing, according to Walter Swennen, Leonardo da Vinci meant that he was not a craftsman. And there is this general, I think, condescendence, how do you say this, condescendence towards craftsmen, as if they would be people that repeat the same things the whole time. They only master their craft. And I think this is an idiotic thing, an idiotic concept invented by writers and intellectuals who do not know how things come into being. In reality, I think all real craftsmen improvise continuously, and it's in this improvisation that the new thing emerges. the wood is too hard, it's too cold, something goes wrong, an accident happens. They dance with the techniques and the materials, and out of this dance tumble new things. And this is what intellectuals later call art, and then they think there must have been an original idea causing this thing to come into being, and they think they have to figure out this idea, and then they call this fantasized original idea, they call it the meaning, the hidden meaning. I was blind, and I tried to be less blind by looking closely at works. I looked at the works of Damien de Lepeleire and Michel Frère, two painters I loved then and still love today. And anyway, their work, I cannot maybe not say that yes, I loved them as well, I still love them. And then we founded a magazine together, an art magazine called NOUS, which meant we, and French word for we, NOUS, together with Charles Van Auric, Jean-François Octave, and a fifth person. That's me, the fifth person. So these are the five. And we made this magazine together. In the first edition of the magazine consisted of reproductions and texts printed on photographic paper. So we made photographs of everything, and then the assistant of Charles Van Auric made 100 photographic copies of each element. And then there were, of course, real photographs amongst these pages, and there was also an etching by Michel Frère. And we made this first, and we presented it in Brussels, and people liked it. I also liked doing this. But Jean-François Octave, Michel Frère, and Charles Van Auric were not really interested to make a second edition, a second number of this magazine, and so Damien de Lepeleire and me, we went on, the two of us as editors, and then we invited artists and writers to participate, and that's how I got to know more people, and how I visited their studios, etc. There was the Belgian poet William Cliff, who at that time already had published, I think, 2 books with Gallimard in France, very famous, prestigious publishing house. I met him. I recently saw he's still alive and kicking. He's 85 now. And I think he won the Prix Goncourt or something, a very prestigious prize. And then, well, other people, the singer Arno participated, whom I admired a lot. And then also for this second number, I went to visit Walter Svennen for the first time, the painter, and a lot of other people. But it's the publishing of this magazine that finally made me meet more people and discover their works, and also dealing with the way they wanted to participate in this magazine. We all asked them to give us something that was not part of their work. And then their contributions were not signed. The names of the artists were printed at the back side of the magazine, but inside there were no names or references, so you were confronted with the thing in itself. According to what I already explained, that I saw it as my mission to discover what was specific about the work of art. And and freeing it from all the rubbish that was attached to it. So the magazine itself showed you things, texts, poems, essays, reproductions, drawings that were made for the magazine, but that were not explained, they were not signed, they were not, you did not know who had made what, really. And so that's how I met Walter Svennen, an artist I made many books about later. I don't know how many, but many. And then the first number was published 28th of November. The second number was published, the first one was published in May 88. I was 25 then. And the second one I edited with Damien de Lepeleire was published 28 November 1988. And then I knew some art historian lady, Véronique Danneels, a very sweet person, and she told me about this very legendary collector, Fiszman, who she told me had been the first collector of Marcel Brotaars, Beuys, Panamarenko, famous people from the 60s. And I had asked all my artist friends, who is the most famous artist in our country? And they all said, in these days, Panamarenko. So I thought, if I want to know about art, it would be good to meet this person. I didn't know his work, I didn't know what he did, I didn't know why he was considered to be the best artist at that time. But Véronique Danneels told me, if you want to get to Panamarenko, we might visit the collector Fiszman, and then maybe he can bring you to Panamarenko. And so we went to buy very expensive biscuits at La Grande Place in Brussels. And we went to visit Fiszman, and yeah, there were beautiful works of art in his home, Brotaars, Panamarenko, Beuys, a copper plate by Beuys. This was all very new to me. I came from literature, philosophy and university, and then suddenly I was confronted with real works of art. There's a German guide walking past with a bunch of tourists now. And then Fiszman told me that Panamarenko had just received a color photocopy machine from Canon. It was the very first photocopy machine in Belgium. And they had given it to him on the condition they could make publicity with him. So they had made this photo of him standing on, leaning on this photocopy machine with stars around his head. And so he told me this as an anecdote, and then I thought, wow, then I could make my magazine there, because we had been making the second number we made with color photocopies that cost €2.50 a page, which might be something like 10 euros today. So how can you make 100 copies of a magazine with 30 pages? It was impossible for us to pay. What we did was, Damien de Lepeleire's mom had an office, and she had a black and white copier, and I think we copied most of the magazine in black and white, and then we added some color. But I thought, wow, that might come in handy. Maybe we can use Panamarenko's photocopy machine. And then we arranged for me to visit him with Véronique Danneels. And this is what happened in November '88. I drove with Véronique Danneels to Antwerp, and when we arrived in the neighborhood of the central station, I didn't know Antwerp very well. She didn't know she lost her way, she got lost, she didn't know how we could get there. So I opened the window and I asked the guy that was biking past me, do you know where Panamarenko lives? And the guy said, yeah, follow me. And he drove 3 kilometers like a madman in front of my car to show me the way. I don't know who this person was, but it was typical and let's say significant. I think. First of all, I still feel the excitement of this guy that was totally overwhelmed with joy that he could bring somebody to Panamarenko. Not knowing who I was a 25-year-old brat. Not knowing Véronique Danneels, but being very happy to bring us in a very generous, joyful way. It was very beautiful. And yeah, later, the next 10 years, I was with Panamarenko 3 months a year, and wherever we went, people looked at him or at us but did not dare to talk to us. So it was like a curtain opening all the time, everywhere, wherever we went. So this was more or less his status in the city of Antwerp, or in Brussels or Ghent or whatever. People respected him and were impressed by him and didn't bother him. And he was very shy, so it suited him. Later, in 2022, I think I interviewed the architect and artist Luc Deleu, the head of Top Office, about Panamarenko in the 60s, because I had learned from somebody, I had heard that people were too shy to enter the main gallery at that time, the white space, because it seemed to be a very bourgeois thing. Now people look back on it as a very progressive hippie gallery, but in these days, probably the main quality of the gallery was that the founder, Annie de Decker, had some bourgeois qualities that pulled contemporary art out of this seeming vulgarity of not being real art. So I think the magic of the gallery must have been also this, that people were shy to enter it. And when I spoke about this and I asked Luc Deleu, was this also your case? And he confirmed. He also told me that he never dared to speak to Panamarenko. That he saw him once on the main shopping street of Antwerp in a white suit with a Panama hat, and that he saw that everybody saw this and nobody dared to approach him. It was as if there was a vacuum around him, which was rather funny because Luc Deleu became the main intermediary between Panamarenko and all the people he had sold work to and wanted it to be repaired or restored or whatever. Whenever anybody wanted to contact Panamarenko, they went through Luc Deleu. And in these days, Panamarenko had convinced his mom to open a shoe shop. And Luc Deleu just entered the shoe shop, then delivered the message for Panamarenko to the mother, and then the mother communicated this message to Panamarenko. There was no direct communication. And Luc Deleu said once he came out and he looked at me from behind the door, and then he nodded and he withdrew. In the room behind, he made Provacar, for example, a 7-meter long iron car that exactly fit in the room. He always did this. All his works were made inside a 7-meter long room, diagonally. These 7 meters were the size of his Cadillac. So later we made the submarine and other works, Bernoulli, always in the same space that was consisted of 2 ground floor rooms opened to be able to park the Cadillac. which diagonally measured, it could fit in diagonally 7 meters. And Panamarenko said that's the main defect of all my sculptures. They always look best when looked at from the right front corner, because that's how I look at them in my studio, supposed studio. We didn't have a studio. So, what did I tell you now? Well, I tell you how I met Damien de Lepeleire and Michel Frère, two painters I admired immediately, and then how this made me meet Panamarenko, and then I skipped one part that I think is also important. Part of my introduction to the art world was also my meeting with a young, learned person whose name was Guy van den Heule, and he studied Greek and Latin. He wrote a thesis on the erotic, I think they were called calligrams by Callimachos, and he introduced me to Gerard Reeve, to Proust, to literary works I did not know yet. He also introduced me to an aesthetic way of life. He was a dandy. Fin de siècle, decadence, certain sensibilities I had not encountered during my previous life on the countryside with simple people. And as it happened, he had founded an art collective called the Belgian Code of Honor, the Belgische Erecode, and this group also comprised Michel Kolenberg, whom we called Louis Peters, and Christian van Haesendonck, who we called in these days Gottfried van Salzburg or Julius Willy. Guy van den Heule we just called Julius Willy. And they liked the Transavanguardia, some people in Italy, and they showed their work in several places, and every time they showed their work they invited me to give the opening speech. And because of course I did not know anything about art or whatsoever, I read my poems, which were not real poems but things I consider to be poems. Stuff I still write today, still being very embarrassed about it. They have always been a kind of parodies of poems, but apparently this seems to be invisible, so the humor seems to be invisible, I don't know. I like making them, and I already like making them in these days, and so every time they invited me, I read some poems, and this was nice. Because people liked them, and they sometimes they thought they were very funny, and it gave me a lot of pleasure. So this was a parallel introduction to art, very obviously without me really being concerned, because I really knew that I did not know anything about art, and the only thing that I could add to their gatherings was my presence and some poetry I made, especially to please, or not to please, but to amuse Guy van den Heule, who loved reading them. I would now like to ask you, is there something I forget to tell about them? Because I think maybe last time I wrote, I remember vaguely some funny story that Chris van Haesendonck wrote for my PhD about me being upset by somebody that came late or something, but I forgot about it. I also looked for a poem I had written, a love poem with the famous verse, famous in my life, Gelijk december, gelijk de zelder tracht naar water in september, zo tracht ik naar u, mijn lief. And I remember there was the most intelligent philosopher of the university, a guy I really admired because he was extremely bright, loved this verse. So.
And you also printed them, no? Or someone printed them and made like a scrapbook looking paper that handed them out at the university.
Yeah, well, at university in these days, and I think still today, most people were only interested in the parties on Friday night, or every night. I think they partied every night, and I never did it. I never partied, but every morning in the restaurant, on every table there were all these photocopied or stenciled invitations for parties, always with girls with naked boobs, and then something like come and party, fun, 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 drink, 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 booze, 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 or something. And there was always this pile, so I got in the habit of also making photocopies of my poems, and I edit them to the pile every morning. I don't know whether I ever met anybody because of this, or whether anybody ever read them. I don't know. I forgot all about it. But I did this. I considered it to be a primary way of publishing. But yeah, we looked for this poem, but it apparently doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It only goes on living in my memory as something that my fellow student liked a lot. Okay, that's more or less this. In 1981, 88. Yeah. Acting, I acted, I played, it was fun. This is more or less it, I think.
Maybe it's also nice to know that the magazine you made, NOUS, is also NOUS, is Greek, it's also Greek, it's spirit, no?
Yeah, many people thought it was NOUS with a crown on the N, and it's more a kind of pretentious thing. Damien de Lepeleire liked a lot. He was always figuring us to be the chef de file, he called it. He made cards like this. Hans Thijs, Damien de Lepeleire, chef de file, which means something like those who lead, the leaders. He had these funny ideas that I think many young artists still have today. They look at a black and white photograph of Hans Arp next to Giacometti, next to Picasso, and they picture themselves in a group of the same importance, and or they want to create groups like that. I think it's normal, it's something of all ages, and so this NOUS was very pretentious, I think, but not to me. Because having studied philosophy, of course, I knew there was this Greek word used a lot in philosophy by Aristotle, for example. And there was also a very stubborn guy that always kept on writing me about this spiritual guy, some esoteric guy. And for years this guy stalked me. Can you please send me a copy of your magazine about the Greek spirit? I don't know, I think I replied 2 times, there is no fucking Greek spirit here, leave me alone. I remember this, yeah, but it's just NOUS. I linked it to a sentence by Flaubert, I remember, but I forgot the sentence. In these days, I was reading the correspondence of Flaubert, which I thought was very instructive. And primarily because I didn't understand anything of it. So it has always been great fun for me to read books I did not understand. I even explained to my students, who all think they cannot read, that when a book presents itself as difficult, it means there's a reason for it to exist. If it would not be difficult, then there's no reason to write or to publish it. A real book tries to bring us closer to a certain experience that we have not had yet. So it is difficult to read, and it's sometimes very hard to get into a book. And Flaubert, he worked all day long, and then in the evening he wrote letters for 4 hours. I think he stopped working around midnight, and then he wrote until 4 o'clock. And he was writing, he had a lot of writing friends. Ernest Feydeau, I think, was one of them, and then there was Maxime Ducamp, who became a photographer. We still have photographs of Flaubert on the pyramids made by Maxime Ducamp. Also, he had a woman friend, a female friend, if I can say this like that, Louise Collet, and she wrote poems, and he read the poems, and then he explained to her why they were no good. And this is very interesting to read for a young writer, because you do not understand why he does not like it. And now there are people outside unlocking and locking bicycles, stealing bicycles, if you hear weird noises. And yeah, I was reading this correspondence, and I learned a lot from it. A lot. He was very bright, Flaubert. And of course his correspondence is very fluent. It's not like his novels that were very wrought, very complicated, very worked upon. In his correspondence, it's like calling somebody on the phone. He was writing like a fast train, trying to explain as clearly as possible to Louise Collet why this poem was no good. One of the ideas that came back all the time was that it was not because she was in love that she could write a love poem, or that it was not because she was sad that she had to write a poem about sadness, and that this sadness would make the poem convincing, which is of course very close to what I already explained today, that artists do not express feelings, they do not translate ideas. That's not what they're doing, I think. And he tried to explain this to Louise Collet. And me not understanding this, I think I spent a couple of years every morning reading a couple of letters by Flaubert. I must have read 1,000 of them or 2,000 of them. He also says somewhere something I like a lot. Il n'y a qu'un beau, mais il y a plusieurs styles. There is only one beauty, but there are many styles. He himself was a romantic writer, as well as a realistic writer, as well as a naturalistic writer. One might say he participated in these three literary movements, but of course these terms and classifications are totally irrelevant. As I said, we have to look into what is really specific about Flaubert. For example, but before I say this, I have to come back to my idea. What was my train of thought? Yeah, il n'y a qu'un beau, mais il y a plusieurs styles, to me meant, it announced my love of diversification and difference. What he really meant was, and I think he was right, if it's well made, it's okay. If it moves you, it's okay. No matter what the style is. It still surprises people that I work with all types of artists, photographers, sculptors, painters, they all seem to be doing different things, whereas in reality it's just the difference that interests me. But I must say something about Proust here, Marcel Proust, who, as I told you in the previous episode, became angry about Sainte-Beuve and not recognizing the talent of Stendhal and Baudelaire. and I think Flaubert as well. But he gets angry again when a guy called Thibaudet says that Flaubert makes language mistakes all the time. This is one of the most beautiful essays I've ever written. Because one of the mistakes is that he uses the word and in a wrong way. Thinks the academic learned Thibaudet. And the other thing was that he would use the imparfait in a wrong way. There are two past tenses in French, the passé simple and the imparfait. And the imparfait indicates a certain duration of time, whereas there is a similar, there's the simple past and the past present, I think in English that are similar, but in French it's passé simple, which indicates one moment in the past, and the imparfait that indicates an action that has been going on, a certain duration. And this very bright, learned, erudite professor like Thibaudet says he doesn't even know French grammar. And then Proust writes a to me, very moving essay. Why it's moving to me, maybe I do not know, or maybe I know, and it's irrelevant to speak about here, but he says, yes, he uses the imparfait in a different way. Because he situates something in a landscape, and then he says, il y avait ces rochers qui surplombaient la vallée. I'm improvising now. Et assombrissaient les maisons dans la vallée, les maisons qui, etc., etc. He uses the imparfait all the time. Imparfait, 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 imparfait. Lorsque soudain fut. And suddenly he uses the passé simple. And Proust says, it's not an error of grammar, it's a specific expression of his sensibility and sensitivity. He evokes the whole world as a passive mass that is always lasting, that is enduring, that is indestructible, that is filled with melancholy and paralyzing us and looming there like in imminent death. And then something happens, or something has happened. And it says he encrusts this event into a kind of massive stillness and paralysis. That's what he's doing. Well, what Proust does there, I try to do as well with artists. To tell other people, no, it's not an error in grammar. He has to use the imparfait this way to evoke his basic feeling, which is one of hopelessness, one might say. Okay, so somebody starts mowing the lawn on the center place of the city of Antwerp. So I think we can stop here. I think this was a basic introduction, and Linx. David asked me in 1986, do you want to come and visit Jimmy with me? James Baldwin, was living in Saint-Paul-de-Vence in France, and David went up and down all the time, and he asked me at least 4 times, do you want to come and visit Jimmy with me? I didn't know who Jimmy was. I didn't really grasp it. Otherwise I might have met James Baldwin. Yeah. Maybe I never met him, but I read his work later, and I love it a lot, and maybe I became even more intimate with him deploring the fact that I had not met the actual person, but really studying his work. It's just a lot of anecdotes. There are so many anecdotes. Yeah, Jimmy, you want to visit me? Well, I didn't have any money. I could not envisage taking the train to Saint-Paul-de-Vence, and then I had an 8-year-old daughter. I had to feed her. I was stealing half of everything we ate for 2 years. It was ghastly. I could not visit Jimmy, even if I think I knew who Jimmy was really, but I could not pay for the journey. So I pretended not to know who Jimmy was. I think that's more or less what happened. Yeah. Okay, end of episode 2. See you again in episode 3 that will cover the years 1988, 1988, 1998.